were never supposed to hear this. What I'm about to tell you was meant to stay buried under polite suburbia, hidden behind manicured lawns, HOA newsletters, and the fragile illusion of community order. But beneath the surface of every smiling neighbor, every security camera mounted on a clean white garage, there's a machine grinding away, a system older than your grandparents, older than the nation itself, and once you see it for what it really is, you'll never unsee it. It began with something so ordinary, so suburban, it should have been laughable, a homeowners association, the kind of faceless bureaucracy that polices the color of your mailbox, the length of your grass, and whether your kid's basketball hoop ruins the aesthetic harmony of the street. But that's the mask. What hides behind that mask is far more ancient. A blueprint of power that stretches back through history, through empires, through priest kings and inquisitors, through every false authority ever created to cage the human spirit. It wasn't the police who took him. It wasn't even criminals in the traditional sense. My teenage son was dragged off the street by two men in black vests that said community enforcement. No badges, no state authority, no oaths sworn to serve or protect, just muscle, a black SUV without plates, and a suburban queen who thought she ruled a kingdom carved from cul-de-sacs and HOA bylaws. That's the surface story. The outrage, the kidnapping, the DA mother who unleashed the law like a weapon to tear it all apart. But beneath it lies something much darker. You see, these weren't just fake cops. They were the physical manifestation of a hidden idea, a virus of control that has been with us for millennia. The idea that power can be faked, that legitimacy can be manufactured, that fear itself is enough to enslave entire communities. Do you understand how dangerous that is? Thin, carefully, two unlicensed thugs can throw on black vests, print the words community enforcement across their backs, and suddenly neighbors obey. They stop. They comply. They lower their eyes. Why? Because humans are conditioned to submit to symbols of power no matter how hollow. It is psychological programming etched into us through centuries of church courts, feudal lords, colonial governors, and uniformed enforcers who weren't gods, weren't divine, weren't superior. They were just people with costumes, rituals, and the willingness to punish. And in that moment, when they snatched my son off the sidewalk, I didn't just see two men working for a deranged HOA president. I saw the Inquisition dragging dissenters from their beds at midnight. I saw the Stasi disappearing neighbors into windowless vans. I saw ancient kings branding common men as criminals simply for standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Different masks, same system. We've been trained to believe in authority more than in truth. A uniform, a title, a badge, or even a fake badge is enough to override instinct. Most men, if stopped by a stranger in tactical gear, will freeze. They'll obey. They'll comply, even when every fiber of their soul knows something is wrong. Why? Because disobedience has been trained out of them, conditioned like cattle, controlled like programmable code. But here's the secret no one tells you. It only works if you believe it works. The moment you see through the costume, the moment you recognize that the emperor wears no clothes, their power collapses. That's why governments, corporations, HOAs, and hidden councils all invest so much energy into maintaining illusions of legitimacy. The robes, the gavels, the seals, the carefully worded letters and bylaws. All of it is theater. Control isn't real, it's a story. And stories are only powerful when we agree to live inside them. The night my son was taken, I saw the machinery of that story break down. Because they had forgotten one detail. His mother wasn't just a mother. She was the district attorney, a woman who understood the law not as a cage but as a weapon. They thought they could play police, but she knew how to summon the real wolves, how to flip the script, how to take their fake authority and grind it into dust beneath the crushing weight of actual legal power. Still, ask yourself, how many times has it worked? How many times has some Karen in a position of petty authority convinced entire communities to bend their knee to false power? How many fake cops throughout history wore uniforms blessed by kings, priests, CEOs, or dictators who had no more legitimacy than Karen in her HOA chair? This is what they don't want you to realize. Control is fragile. Power is paper thin. The only thing that makes it real is your belief in it, and once you withdraw that belief, once you rip the mask from its face, you see the trembling, insecure human behind it all. A failed police cadet, a paranoid queen of the cul-de-sac, a dictator in miniature. But don't be fooled. What happened in my neighborhood wasn't just a suburban scandal, it was a mirror. A small-scale reenactment of a pattern that stretches across all human history. If you want to understand how empires rise, how dictators rule, how corporations enslave billions with contracts and logos, look no further than a homeowners association with too much money and too little oversight. Because this isn't just about my son, it's about you. And what happens the day you realize the power pressing against your neck is nothing but a costume, a title, and a lie? Have you ever noticed how the smallest tyrants often reveal the deepest truths about power? A petty dictator in a suburban neighborhood is not different in essence from an emperor sitting on a golden throne. Only the scale changes. The psychology, the machinery, the methods, they are the same. And if you dare to look closely, you'll see it everywhere. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, was a failed police recruit. She couldn't pass the psychological screening. The reports whispered words like unstable, narcissistic, control-obsessed. Yet here she was, ruling over hundreds of people, not with a badge, not with true legal authority, but with a binder of bylaws and a willingness to wield fear like a weapon. She created her own enforcement squad, 2 men in tactical vests who owed their loyalty not to the Constitution, not to the people, not even to the law, but to her. Think about that. A fake police force with no oversight, enforcing rules not written by a legislature but invented in a living room meeting. That is not neighborhood governance, that is a private fiefdom. And history is full of them. The Spanish Inquisition was not an empire, it was an institution, an apparatus of fear. Small tribunals, local priests, ordinary men given authority by a signature on parchment. Yet they became monsters. Why? Because the community believed in their legitimacy. Neighbors testified against neighbors. Wives accused husbands. Not because it was true, but because the machine demanded it. And once the machine is believed in, it feeds itself. That's exactly how Karen ruled our neighborhood. Every monthly HOA meeting was less about property values and more like a trial, a theater of guilt and shame. Someone's fence was the wrong height. Someone else's child left a bike on the driveway, and the community would gather like an obedient jury while Karen pronounced judgment. The bylaws weren't rules, they were scripture. She quoted them the way a priest quotes sacred texts, and her board, they were her cardinals. Timid men and women who voted yes because they were too afraid to be targeted next. I saw it in their eyes, the same hollow obedience you see in every system of control. They didn't respect her, they feared her. Fear is enough. Now here's the disturbing part. When you zoom out, you realize that every system of power works the same way. Governments, corporations, secret councils, it's always the same script. A group invents rules. They enforce them with symbols and fear. And the people obey, because disobedience is punished. Whether it's losing your house over unpaid HOA fines, or losing your freedom under a dictator's regime, the principle is identical. Ask yourself this. How many of your daily choices are yours? And how many are just programmed obedience to rules you didn't create, laws you didn't agree to, systems you never consented to join? That is the invisible cage, and most never see it. But once you see, you can't go back. I saw it the night they took my son. The suburban facade cracked, and the raw machinery of control showed itself. It wasn't about Ethan. It was about Karen proving she could do it. That she could label a harmless boy as a subject presenting ongoing risk. That she could redefine reality with her words and force the community to believe it. Do you understand the depth of that madness? She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was rewriting truth itself. This is how cults operate. This is how inquisitions spread. This is how dictators rise. First, they redefine reality. Then they enforce it with fear. And finally, they erase opposition until obedience becomes normal. But here's the secret they never want you to realize. Obedience is a choice. Authority is only power if you give it recognition. The robes, the gavels, the uniforms, they mean nothing without your consent. Karen could build her fake police force, but the moment my wife, the district attorney, stepped into the room, her entire illusion collapsed. Why? Because my wife refused to believe the story, she replaced it with her own. This is the moment where most men wake up or fall deeper asleep. You either see the cage for what it is, or you convince yourself the cage is safety, order, civilization. That's why history is full of obedient citizens who turned their neighbors over to inquisitors, to secret police, to corporate enforcers. They told themselves they were protecting the community, following the rules, doing what was right, but they were just feeding the machine, and that's why I'm telling you this story. Because the HOA wasn't the enemy, Karen wasn't the enemy, even the fake cops weren't the true enemy. The real enemy is the system of obedience living inside all of us. The programming that makes us lower our eyes, comply, and submit to false power. My son's kidnapping wasn't an accident. It was a message, a demonstration. Karen wanted to show the neighborhood that her word was law, that she could reach into anyone's home and take what she wanted. And if we hadn't fought back, the entire community would have absorbed that lesson. They would have believed it, and that belief would have made her power real. This is how corruption grows, not through violence alone, but through quiet acceptance, through the belief that this is just how things are. That's the virus, that's the lie. And once you see it, you have a choice to make. Stay inside the illusion, or step out of it and become dangerous, the kind of man who cannot be controlled, who cannot be caged by symbols and titles and fake authority. But that choice has a cost. Once you wake up, the machine will notice you. It always does. There is nothing new under the sun. What happened in my neighborhood, the fake cops, the HOA queen, the abduction of my son, wasn't just an isolated act of madness. It was the reenactment of an ancient ritual of power. Because history is not a straight line. It's a cycle, a pattern. The same script recycled under new costumes, new symbols, new masks. The Romans understood this better than anyone's. They built their empire not just on legions, but on councils, men in robes gathered in marble halls pretending to debate the will of the people. But in truth, it was theater. Behind closed doors, deals were struck, enemies were named, reputations destroyed. The Senate was not a democracy, it was a homeowners association with sharper knives. Petty men, drunk on authority, enforcing laws they invented to keep themselves in power. Does that sound familiar? Karen, with her binder of bylaws, was no different from a Roman censor. She measured fences instead of morals, grass length instead of virtue. But the principle was the same. She decided what was acceptable, and her enforcers punished anyone who resisted. In Rome, disobedience meant exile. In suburbia, it meant fines, shaming, and, if you dared defy her long enough, physical removal. That's how deep her delusion ran, and Rome was only one mask. In medieval Europe, it was the guilds, merchant guilds, craft guilds, secret orders that claimed to protect standards and preserve quality. But under the surface, they were power cartels. If you weren't a member, you couldn't sell, couldn't build, couldn't live. They were the HOA of the Middle Ages, patrolling not cul-de-sacs but entire cities. They controlled trade, they controlled knowledge, they controlled who ate and who starved. And like Karen, they wrapped it all in the language of order, community, and the greater good. But the guilds learned their tricks from something older still. The secret brotherhoods of priests and kings, the keepers of mysteries who built temples, not neighborhoods. They used rituals instead of bylaws, robes instead of polos, incense instead of clipboards. But it was the same system. A hidden few dictating the rules of life to the many. And if you defied them, you weren't just breaking a rule, you were defying God himself. That's the ultimate trick, to equate obedience with virtue and disobedience with sin. Karen did the same thing on a smaller scale. To her, my son wasn't a boy. He was a threat, a heretic in her suburban church. She called him a predator, a terrorist of the cul-de-sac, a danger to community harmony. Do you hear the language? It's not logic, it's doctrine, it's dogma. She turned a child into a symbol of evil because it justified her power. That is the oldest trick in the book. Demonize one, and the many will consent to your rule. The truth is, humans crave order. We want safety, stability, certainty, and that hunger makes us vulnerable. It allows petty tyrants and secret councils to step in and offer exactly that, at a cost. The cost is freedom. The cost is individuality. The cost is your soul. And Most people pay it gladly because the alternative is uncertainty, danger, chaos. That is the great paradox of power. People will surrender to cages if you convince them the bars are protection. Look around you. Corporations do it with logos and contracts. Governments do it with seals and uniforms. HOAs do it with bylaws and threats of fines. Secret societies do it with oaths and symbols, different masks, same script. You think you're free, but you are bound by invisible threads spun centuries ago, and once you notice the pattern, you start to see the psychological architecture behind it. Every ruling class, every cult, every HOA president uses the same 4 weapons. First, symbols, uniforms, robes, badges, clipboards. They don't have to mean anything. They just have to look like they mean something. Second, ritual. Monthly meetings, courtroom trials, sacred ceremonies. These are not about solving problems. They're about reinforcing the illusion of authority. Third, fear. Fines, exile, shaming, imprisonment, hell. The specific punishment doesn't matter. What matters is the threat. And fourth, belief. The most powerful weapon of all. Because without belief, the symbols collapse, the rituals crumble, and the fear evaporates. Karen had all 4. Her clipboard was a badge, her monthly meetings were a tribunal, her fake cops were the sword, and her neighbors' belief, their silence, their compliance, their obedience, was the fuel that kept her empire burning. But what happens when belief breaks? What happens when someone says no? When a DA mother tears the mask from the face of false authority and exposes the raw fraud beneath? That's when the entire structure trembles. That's when the cycle risks breaking. This is the danger of knowing history, because once you see the pattern, you realize the HOA isn't unique. It's everywhere. It's in every office, every school, every court, every government chamber. The world is a vast HOA. Rules within rules, fines in fines, enforcers at every level, all of them demanding your obedience. And the truth they never wanted you to hear is this: it's all optional. You can step outside the pattern. You can break the cycle. But to do that, you must first awaken. You must see through the mask. That's why I tell you this, because once you hear it, you can't return to sleep. Control doesn't happen by accident. It's engineered. Every system that cages you, whether it's a government, a corporation, a church, or a homeowners association, is built on architecture, not of stone or steel, but of psychology. Invisible blueprints etched into the human mind, designed to keep you obedient without a fight. The fake cops who kidnapped my son weren't just thugs. They were tools of a system that's been perfected for centuries. Think carefully about what they did. They wore vests that said community enforcement, not police, not security, community enforcement. Do you see the precision in that phrase? It's engineered language. It sounds official, neutral, even benevolent. They weren't thugs in a van. They were enforcing community standards. That's how power speaks. Soft words, hard hands. Language is the first layer of control. Every empire has used it. The Romans called conquest pacification. The Inquisition called torture correction. Today, corporations call mass surveillance safety. Governments call censorship protection from misinformation. Karen called kidnapping a child, detaining a subject for community harmony. Different words, same purpose: to mask violence behind the illusion of virtue. The second layer is ritualized authority. They didn't just grab my son. They zip-tied him, pushed his head down, forced him into a black SUV. That wasn't logistics, that was theater. Ritualized humiliation, designed to signal dominance and train compliance. It's the same reason armies march in formation, the same reason prisoners are shaved, the same reason cult initiations break you before they rebuild you. Power loves ritual because ritual bypasses reason. You don't think, you obey. The third layer is psychological conditioning. Karen had been whispering for weeks that my son was a threat, a bully, a predator. She poisoned the well of perception so that when he was taken, neighbors didn't cry out in shock. They froze. They rationalized. Maybe he did something wrong. Maybe this is necessary. That's how power operates. It manufactures the enemy, then punishes the enemy, then convinces you the punishment was just. But the deepest layer, the one most men never see, is the illusion of legitimacy. This is the masterstroke of control. If you believe authority is real, it doesn't matter whether it actually is. Karen's cops had no jurisdiction, no badges, no state recognition, but they didn't need it, because the community believed they had authority. And belief is enough to make illusion function like reality. This is the architecture of obedience: words, rituals, conditioning, legitimacy. Together they form a control grid so complete you don't even realize you're inside it. And once you're trained, you'll obey anyone who wears the costume. A priest, a politician, a CEO, a fake cop in a black vest. Do you feel the weight of this yet? Do you see why I say this story is bigger than a suburban HOA? Because what happened on that street is what happens on every street, in every city, in every empire. The machine of control doesn't care about scale. It runs the same playbook, whether it's ruling a neighborhood or a nation. Think of the Soviet Union. Millions obeyed because uniforms, symbols, and words told them they must. Think of Nazi Germany. Think of the Cultural Revolution. Think of every war on terror, every safety act, every emergency power. It's all the same. A system designed to convince you that obedience is survival and resistance is madness. And here is the most disturbing truth. Once you see this blueprint, you realize the HOA wasn't copying governments. Governments were copying the HOA. Small groups policing the behavior of the many. That's the original model. Villages, clans, tribes ruled by councils. Control didn't scale up from nations down. It scaled down from families up. The HOA wasn't a parody of government. It was a mirror of its origin. But now listen carefully, because this is where most men turn away. What I'm about to say next is the kind of knowledge that changes you. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Every system of control, whether it calls itself church, state, HOA, or corporation, is designed for one purpose: to break the individual, to strip you of your power, your will, your sovereignty, and replace it with obedience to the callers. Active. You're not a man, you're a subject, a member, a consumer, a resident. Words engineered to make you smaller. My son was never just Ethan to Karen, he was a test. If she could take him, silence him, redefine him as a threat, then everyone else would fold. The entire community would internalize the lesson: your children are not yours, your freedom is not yours, your life is not yours. It all belongs to the collective, and she was the face of that collective. This is the essence of tyranny, whether ancient or modern. They don't need to enslave your body, they only need to enslave your mind, because once your mind accepts the cage, your body follows willingly. And here is where I ask you something dangerous. I want you to pause and consider the question no one asks. How much of your life is yours? Your job, your taxes, your speech, your neighborhood, your children, your body? How many decisions are truly yours, and how many are permissions you've been conditioned to beg for? This is the truth they never wanted you to hear. You are not free, you are managed, you are processed, you are regulated, just like my son was that night. And unless you awaken to the system, you will stay that way forever. Control doesn't begin with governments. It doesn't begin with HOAs. It begins in the family. From the moment you are born, the system begins shaping you. Not with chains, not with prisons, but with rituals disguised as care. Your name is registered with the state, your number assigned. Before you even breathe your first word, you're already catalogued, claimed, documented. You are not simply you are property. And then the conditioning deepens. School bells teach you to move when commanded. Desks teach you to sit in silence. Pledges teach you to worship symbols you do not understand. Grades teach you that obedience is rewarded and resistance is punished. By the time you're 18, you are not a man or woman. You are a trained subject. Churches do the same. Bow your head, repeat the prayer, accept authority without question. Ritual replaces thought. Guilt replaces self. The lesson is always the same. Obedience is salvation. Disobedience is damnation. And then you step into the workforce, another system, another council, another HOA in disguise. Badges, IDs, policies, codes of conduct, meetings that mimic rituals, HR departments that function like inquisitions. You are always being watched, measured, judged. Your paycheck becomes the leash around your neck. Do you see it yet? Control is not one cage. It is a series of cages, each nested inside the other. Family, school, church, work, government, HOA. The bars change shape, but they are always there. And here is the cruelest truth. Most families pass the chains willingly. Parents, without realizing it, become the first enforcers. They scold their children for questioning rules. They reward compliance. They say, that's just the way the world works. They hand the leash to their sons and daughters and call it love. That is what Karen tried to do to my son. She wanted to mark him early, to teach him the lesson every tyrant teaches. You are not free. You belong to us. And had I not been who I was, had I not ripped him out of that SUV and faced those fake enforcers down, he would have carried that lesson forever. One scarred night, multiplied across a lifetime. That's how obedience becomes generational. But now you must answer something for yourself, right now. Say the words out loud or write them below. Do you choose the cage, safety through obedience, or do you choose the key, freedom through resistance? Don't skip this. Don't scroll past. This is not a game. The act of saying it, typing it, claiming it, is the ritual. Your choice is your declaration. Will you be another compliant resident of the great HOA, or will you step outside its fence? This is how power works. It forces you to choose without realizing you are choosing. But I am giving you the awareness. You cannot claim ignorance anymore. Understand this. Choosing the key is not easy. It means risk. It means struggle. It means you will stand alone against neighbors, bosses, teachers, priests, officials, presidents, Karens. It means you will no longer be managed like livestock, but choosing the cage, that is the path of least resistance, comfort, safety, acceptance. You will be praised for your obedience, rewarded for your compliance, loved for your silence, until the day you realize that love was only tolerance and your soul was the price. This is the point of no return. My son was forced to face it at 16. I am forcing you to face it now. Which will you choose? The cage or the key? Most people choose the cage. That's why empires endure. That's why churches expand. That's why HOA presidents sleep soundly. The system depends on compliance, and compliance depends on fear. But every era, every empire, every prison has faced the same problem. There are always a few who choose the key. The Egyptians called them heretics. The Romans called them traitors. The medieval church called them witches. The Soviets called them dissidents. Karen called my son a predator. Different names, same archetype. The free soul who refuses to kneel. And though history paints them as scattered outcasts, the truth is deeper. They were never alone. Across centuries, across continents, these free ones found each other. They formed hidden brotherhoods, whispering the truth that power tried to erase. Some lived as philosophers, some as mystics, some as outlaws, some as artists, but they were all carrying the same fire, the refusal to live in cages. You see glimpses of them in the cracks of history. The Stoics who taught inner sovereignty in the heart of Rome, the Gnostics who defied the church's monopoly on God, the Sufis who danced in ecstasy outside the reach of rulers, the underground printers who smuggled forbidden books beneath tyrants' noses, the runaway slaves who built hidden communities in the swamps and mountains, free beyond the maps of kings. They are the invisible counter-society, the ones who slip through the bars and show others the way out. You won't read about them in school because schools are cages. You won't see them in museums because museums are curated by councils. But if you listen carefully, you can feel them, like echoes, like fingerprints, like a whisper that somehow survived every fire, every purge, very attempt to erase it. And here is the secret. Once you choose the key, you join them. You step into that lineage. You become part of the hidden history of resistance. My son did not know it that night, but when he stood silent in the back of that black SUV, refusing to break, he became one of them, not by ceremony, not by ritual, but by choice. That is what tyrants fear more than anything. Not violence, not protest, not even revolution. They fear the quiet awakening of one mind at a time. Because the control grid is only as strong as your belief in it, and the moment you stop believing, the moment you see through the symbols and rituals, you become untouchable. You may still suffer, you may still be punished, but you will not be owned. This is why history repeats. The cages return, the councils rise, the rituals continue, but the fire never goes out. It passes from hand to hand, generation to generation, in stories, in songs, in forbidden books, in whispered truths at kitchen tables. And now it has passed to you. You are standing at the same threshold as my son, as the rebels of Rome, as the witches of Europe, as the slaves who escaped and never returned. You have been offered the same choice. And if you chose the key, you are already part of them. You may not see them yet, but they see you. When I pulled my son from that SUV, when I tore the zip ties from his wrists, when I looked into Karen's eyes and saw the quiet fury of a priestess denied her sacrifice, I understood something chilling. This wasn't random. This wasn't personal. This was ritual. Think about it. An innocent boy, accused of unseen crimes, a council of neighbors whispering judgment, fake enforcers in costumes of authority, a public humiliation meant to break him, and the silence of the community, watching, waiting, consenting. That's not law, that's liturgy, that's initiation by ordeal. Every empire has used it. The Romans threw men into arenas not for justice but for ritualized spectacle. The medieval church staged trials not to find truth but to display power. Modern states parade suspects in orange jumpsuits and shackles on live TV before a single verdict is passed. These are not accidents. These are rights. Karen's HOA was not inventing anything new. They were echoing an ancient pattern. A singled-out caste as the outsider, stripped of dignity, forced to face the community's judgment. If he broke, if he submitted, he would carry the mark of obedience forever. If he resisted, he would be scarred, hunted, perhaps even destroyed. Either way, the ritual served its purpose, to teach everyone else what happens when you don't comply. But here's what they didn't plan for. My son did not break, and that's when I realized the truth. These rituals aren't just about control. They are tests, trials, a sorting mechanism. They divide the obedient from the free, the caged from the key-bearers. The community isn't just punishing one, it's watching to see who flinches, who complies, who resists. That night, Ethan was not just walking home. He was walking into the oldest test humanity knows. And now, so are you. Look around. Do you think the HOA was an anomaly? Do you think fake cops in black SUVs are rare? No. The same ritual is expanding, neighborhood by neighborhood, city by city, nation by nation. Initiations are happening everywhere, disguised as emergencies, safety protocols, new standards. Each one is a test. Will you kneel or will you resist? Will you choose the cage or the key? The truth is, the great initiation is already here. You felt it. The endless surveillance, the shifting rules, the language that changes overnight and demands your obedience. The punishments for words, for thoughts, for questions. These are not policies. These are not coincidences. These are trials. And if you think you can avoid it by staying quiet, by keeping your head down, you are mistaken. Sooner or later, they will come for you, or for your children. The system requires it. Someone must always be made the example. The ritual must continue. That's why I'm telling you this story. Not because my son was unique, but because he wasn't. He was every child, every man, every woman who has ever been tested by the council, the mob, the empire. His trial was small, suburban, forgettable, but it was also eternal. A spark from the same fire that has burned since the first cages were built. And here is the final truth. You will face your own trial. Maybe soon, maybe it has already begun. And in that moment, no law, no government, no council will decide who you are. You will decide. You will look at the cage. You will look at the key. And you will choose. This is the part they never tell you. Empires don't collapse because of armies. They collapse because their cages fail. Because the rituals stop working. Because too many people start choosing the key. That night, Karen thought she was just disciplining a teenager, but in truth she was acting out the oldest script of control, and when I tore it apart in front of her, when my son refused to kneel, something shifted. Not in the HOA, not in the neighborhood, in the pattern itself. Another crack in the cage, another ember added to the fire, and that is how change has always come. Not from revolutions you read in history books, but from moments no one records. A man who refuses the order, a woman who questions the priest, a child who will not bow. Quiet sparks in the dark, carried forward, igniting everything in their time. That is what frightens them. Not mobs, not weapons, not slogans, but you, waking up, seeing the bars, refusing the leash, because once you do, you are no longer theirs. So hear me, the trials will continue, the rituals will intensify, you will be tested, your children will be tested, some will break, some will kneel, most will stay silent, but a few, just a few, will choose the key. And when enough do, the cages will fall like they always have. And that's the prophecy, not mine, not new. The same prophecy whispered in catacombs, in forests, in swamps, in secret rooms where the free gathered under Empire's shadow. The same prophecy that carried us here. The cages cannot hold forever, the fire cannot die, and the choice will always come. It came for my son, it came for me, and now it comes for you. Choose wisely.